Seen from a distance, Himeji Castle doesn't announce itself with raw heaviness the way many stone fortresses do. It appears to float above the hill, its plastered walls catching light like layered feathers. That visual effect is where the nickname comes from. The white heron, as if a great bird has folded its wings on the ridge and decided to stay. The whiteness is not just aesthetic. It is part of a defensive skin, lime plaster that helps protect timber and reduces the spread of fire, turned into a signature that makes the entire complex feel both refined and untouchable. The castle's shape is easy to admire and hard to read at the same time. From the outside, the main keep looks like a single, confident tower, but the interior reveals a multi-level system of rooms, stairways, and hidden transitions. The keep rises in a tiered silhouette, multiple roofs stacked like armor plates, while the structure beneath is timber-framed, engineered to carry tremendous weight without collapsing under its own height. This blend of elegance and practicality defines Himeji, beauty that is inseparable from calculation. Approach routes were designed to control the body, not just stop it. The path toward the inner defences winds and turns, forcing visitors to move in tight corridors, change direction, and pass through gates that feel increasingly narrow and intentional. Straight lines are rare. Sight lines are interrupted. If an attacking force tried to rush the entrance, the design would break its rhythm, compressing numbers, exposing flanks, and turning speed into confusion. Even today, walking those curves creates a mild disorientation that makes the castle's calm feel earned rather than effortless. Walls and courtyards form a layered puzzle of containment. Instead of relying on one decisive barrier, Himeji uses multiple rings of defense, each with its own gates, angles, and vantage points. The white, plastered surfaces hide a brutal logic. Defenders could observe movement below, funnel intruders into predetermined spaces, and strike from above. Open areas are shaped like traps, places where an enemy might think they've gained ground, only to realize the geometry has guided them into exposure. Defensive openings and firing positions are integrated into the architecture in ways that feel almost discreet, as if the castle prefers not to reveal how dangerous it can be. The main keep sits like the core of a living organism, connected to smaller keeps and corridors that support it. This isn't a lone tower, it's a network. Storage areas, command spaces, and protected passages turn the interior into a functioning headquarters, rather than a symbolic stage. Narrow staircases steepen suddenly. Floors change in ways that challenge memory. The building teaches you that you are being directed, even when you think you are choosing where to go. In a siege, that control would have been decisive. Defenders would know the pathways by instinct, while outsiders would be forced to learn them under pressure. At the same time, Himeji is not only a weapon. It is also a statement about status, culture, and the kind of authority that wants to be seen as orderly. The whiteness reads as purity, but also as discipline, maintenance on a scale that signals resources and organization. The layered roofs and careful lines declare that power can be graceful without becoming soft. A castle like this communicates that the people who govern from here claim more than strength. They claim taste, ritual, and an ability to impose harmony on a world that is never fully harmonious. What makes Himeji especially compelling is how it carries the atmosphere of its era without being trapped in it. The castle preserves the feeling of a society that planned for conflict as a normal condition, where architecture anticipated betrayal, raids, and sudden shifts of loyalty. Yet, it also reflects a world that valued controlled beauty as a form of legitimacy. It is not simply old, It is designed to make power feel inevitable, and to make the viewer feel watched, guided, and quietly impressed all at once. Even in modern times, the white heron image does something subtle. It softens the first impression without weakening the deeper one. The castle looks serene, then gradually reveals how carefully it manages movement, vision, and access. That delayed realization is part of its enduring pull. Himeji invites admiration first, then curiosity, then a more unsettling respect. Because the elegance turns out to be one of the defenses. Japanese castle design reached its most refined expression not through size alone, but through balance. Architecture, landscape, defense, and symbolism were fused into a single system where nothing stood alone. A great castle was expected to dominate its surroundings without overwhelming them, to command movement without appearing rigid, and to embody authority without crude display. Mastery lay in orchestration rather than excess, and in this sense, Japanese castle architecture became less about walls and more about controlled experience. Verticality was handled with restraint and intelligence. Multi-tiered keeps rose upward not as sheer towers, but as layered compositions of roofs and platforms, each level slightly offset. This created visual complexity while distributing weight and stress efficiently. Timber frames absorbed movement during earthquakes, while stone bases provided stability without attempting total rigidity. The structure accepted that the ground would move, and instead of resisting it, learned how to move with it. Engineering wisdom was hidden behind elegance. Defense was never concentrated in a single point. Japanese castles relied on depth rather than brute obstruction. Moats, slopes, gates, baileys, and corridors formed a sequence of challenges, rather than a single wall to breach. An attacker was not meant to be stopped immediately, but delayed, redirected, exhausted, and exposed. Every step forward was carefully anticipated by the design. Space itself became a weapon, shaping behavior long before contact occurred. Stonework at the base of these castles reveals another layer of mastery. The sloped walls were not uniform or decorative. They were calculated surfaces designed to resist climbing, absorb impact, and deflect force. Irregular stone fitting strengthened the structure while also discouraging easy dismantling. From a distance, these bases look calm and orderly, but close inspection reveals a deliberate roughness, a refusal to offer footholds or patterns an enemy could exploit. Interior planning continued this logic of control. Staircases steepened suddenly, corridors narrowed without warning, and rooms shifted in scale and light. Movement was never neutral. The building guided bodies and attention simultaneously. Defenders knew these changes instinctively, while intruders would feel disoriented, slowed, and unsure. The architecture trained its users, turning familiarity into advantage and unfamiliarity into vulnerability. Yet these castles were also political spaces. They projected legitimacy through proportion, alignment, and finish. Clean roof lines, symmetrical massing, and deliberate visual harmony communicated order in a fractured world. Authority was presented as calm, disciplined, and inevitable. A ruler seated within such a structure did not appear as a warlord clinging to power, but as a figure presiding over balance itself. Architecture reinforced governance by making rule feel natural rather than imposed. The integration of natural surroundings completed the designed philosophy. Hills, rivers, forests, and plains were not obstacles to be cleared, but elements to be incorporated. Sight lines were chosen carefully, allowing the castle to see without being fully seen. Seasonal changes altered the appearance of the structure, making it feel alive rather than fixed. This responsiveness to nature distinguished Japanese castles from many of their counterparts elsewhere, grounding power in landscape rather than isolating it from the world. What elevates Japanese castle architecture to the level of mastery is this layered intelligence. Nothing is wasted, nothing is accidental, and nothing relies on a single solution. Beauty masks function, function reinforces authority, and authority dissolves into ritual and habit. The result is a form of architecture that does not shout its strength, but teaches it quietly, step by step, to anyone who enters its space. Japanese castles were built to win time before they had to win battles. The most sophisticated designs didn't rely on one unbreakable wall, but on making attackers lose their sense of direction, tempo, and certainty. A castle could look calm from afar. Clean roof lines, orderly courtyards, white plaster, while the approach routes beneath that beauty were engineered to produce hesitation. The defence begins long before the first gate, in the way the landscape is read and the way the body is forced to move. Labyrinth planning was not random complexity, it was controlled confusion. Approaches often curved, doubled back, and narrowed in ways that prevented a direct charge. Straight lines, so useful for momentum and formation, were intentionally disrupted. A force that expected to rush a main entrance would find itself funneled into angled turns where visibility collapses, spacing breaks apart, and leadership loses the ability to signal cleanly. The castle doesn't merely block movement, it edits movement, slicing an army into smaller, less coordinated fragments. Gates were designed as psychological choke points as much as physical ones. Instead of a single monumental entry, many castles use sequences of gates, with offset angles forcing attackers to turn their bodies and expose flanks. A gate might open into what looks like relief, an open yard, a wider space, only for that space to function as a killing ground watched from multiple heights. The sense of progress becomes part of the trap. The attacker feels they are advancing, but the design ensures that each success places them deeper inside controlled geometry. The walls themselves carry deception in their surfaces. White plaster could conceal defensive openings, and the apparent smoothness of a facade could hide the positions from which defenders could observe and strike. Arrow and gun ports were integrated into patterns that didn't scream military, especially from a distance or at speed. Attackers scanning for obvious weaknesses could miss the real ones, the points where defenders could shoot downward into tight corridors, or where angles allow crossfire without defenders ever needing to show themselves fully. Stairs and interior transitions amplified this intelligence. Steep staircases that change direction abruptly, low ceilings in key passages, and sudden shifts in light and shadow were not just architectural quirks. They were tools for exhausting intruders and breaking group cohesion. When people climb quickly, breathing hard, carrying weapons, they become loud and predictable. The building exploits that. It forces them into bottlenecks, then punishes the bottlenecks. Familiarity becomes a weapon. Defenders move like they own the space because they literally do. Even the empty spaces were often designed as traps. Courtyards and baileys could look like safe staging areas, but their boundaries were chosen to expose anyone inside to observation from multiple layers: walls, towers, elevated corridors, and inner gates. The attacker's instinct is to gather, reorganize, and breathe. The castle anticipates that instinct and turns it into vulnerability. The most dangerous moments are often the pauses when a force believes it has earned a break. Deception also extended into how a castle suggested its own centre. The main keep might appear as the obvious goal, a visible symbol that draws attackers forward like a magnet. But the path to it is rarely direct, and the closer one gets, the more the route becomes a puzzle of turns, gates, and dead ends. This creates a subtle strategic dilemma. Commit to the push and risk collapse of formation, or slow down and lose initiative. Either choice benefits the defenders. The castle's genius is not in forcing one mistake. It offers a menu of bad options. What makes this defensive intelligence feel like a pinnacle is how seamlessly it merges with aesthetic order. The deception isn't ugly. It is hidden in proportion, rhythm, and calm surfaces. A visitor can admire harmony while unknowingly following routes designed to delay and control. That dual identity, refined beauty on the surface, aggressive manipulation underneath, explains why Japanese castle architecture remains so compelling. The fortress does not shout its strength. It teaches it quietly, step by step, by making you move exactly the way it wants. Samurai power was never simply about individual warriors or battlefield heroics. It was a structured system of loyalty, land control, and obligation centered on the authority of the daimyo. Castles functioned as the physical expression of this hierarchy. From these fortified complexes, the daimyo governed territory, collected resources, and commanded military service. Authority flowed downward through retainers and upward through allegiance, forming a network that bound personal honor to political survival. The castle stood at the heart of this order, as both command center and symbol. It was where decisions about war, alliances, and succession were made, and where rewards and punishments were distributed. Samurai were not free agents, they were bound to the castle as much as to their lord. The fortress defined the spatial reality of power, anchoring loyalty to a place that could be defended, supplied, and controlled. To serve the castle was to serve the daimyo himself. Feudal authority depended on stability as much as strength. A daimyo who could protect his lands from invasion gained legitimacy without needing constant warfare. Castles that resisted assault reinforced the idea that the ruling order was not temporary. Each failed siege strengthened the ruler's reputation, discouraging rebellion from within and aggression from without. Military success did not always require victory in battle. Sometimes endurance alone was enough. The claim that certain castles were never taken reflects this logic of deterrence. Their survival was not accidental. It resulted from layered defences, intelligent planning, and a deep understanding of how warfare unfolded in practice. Attackers faced not just walls and gates, but supply problems, morale collapse, and the psychological strain of fighting a structure that refused to yield. A castle that never fell taught enemies to reconsider before committing resources to its destruction. Samurai discipline was essential to this endurance. Defense required patience, coordination, and acceptance of hierarchy. Individual valor mattered less than collective control. Orders were followed not because they were inspiring, but because the system demanded it. Samurai garrisons trained to hold positions, manage supplies, and exploit the castle's design. Their power lay in consistency, not spectacle. The daimyo's authority was reinforced by the castle's role as an administrative centre. Records, tax storage, and logistical planning took place behind its walls. Control over food and weapons often decided conflicts before fighting began. A well-managed castle could outlast enemies who underestimated the importance of organisation. Feudal power was sustained by paperwork as much as by swords. Political calculation shaped military choices. A castle that could not be taken easily altered the balance of negotiation. Rivals were more likely to seek alliances, marriages, or treaties than risk a costly siege. The fortress became a bargaining tool, its reputation shaping regional politics. In this way, military architecture influenced diplomacy as directly as armed force. What made such castles truly resilient was the alignment between social order and physical structure. Samurai loyalty, daimyo authority, and architectural intelligence reinforced one another. The castle did not stand apart from feudal power, it embodied it. Its undefeated record was not just a technical achievement, but evidence that the system governing it was functioning exactly as intended. Japanese castles were engineered around a deliberate tension between permanence and flexibility. Stone foundations anchored the structure to the landscape, absorbing weight and resisting erosion, while timber frameworks above allowed the building to breathe, shift, and survive earthquakes. This combination was not a compromise, but a solution refined over generations. Stone did the work of resisting the ground. Wood did the work of resisting time and movement. Together, they created fortresses that were resilient rather than rigid. The stone bases were carefully shaped rather than smooth. Sloped, irregular walls discouraged climbing and absorbed shock, while their mass stabilized the lighter wooden superstructures above. These foundations defined the castle's defensive footprint, shaping how attackers approached and where they could be exposed. Engineering choices here were inseparable from strategy. The ground itself became part of the defense, turning gravity, angle, and surface texture into active obstacles. Above the stone, timber construction dominated. Pillars, beams, and joints were assembled with precision that allowed strength without brittleness. Wood made rapid repair possible during sieges and reduced catastrophic collapse under stress. Fire was a risk, but it was managed through plaster coatings, spacing, and internal compartmentalization. The castle was not built to be indestructible. It was built to remain functional under pressure. Military engineering prioritized recovery as much as resistance. These structural decisions shaped daily life inside the walls. Castles were not empty shells waiting for war. They were inhabited systems. Samurai retainers, servants, artisans, guards, and administrators all moved through spaces designed for hierarchy and efficiency. Storage rooms for rice and weapons were placed with the same care as defensive towers. Survival depended on logistics, and daily routines were organized around maintaining readiness without exhausting resources. Movement within the castle followed unspoken rules. Narrow corridors, steep stairs, and layered courtyards controlled traffic, separating ranks and functions. A samurai knew where he belonged and where he did not. Servants learned routes that avoided sensitive areas. Children, messengers, and guards all experienced the same architecture differently. The building trained its inhabitants through repetition, turning space into discipline. Daily life balanced preparation and normalcy. Weapons were inspected, armor maintained, and drills practiced. But meals were cooked, records kept, and rituals observed. Gardens, shrines, and living quarters softened the fortress environment without weakening it. These elements mattered psychologically. A castle that felt livable could sustain long periods of tension. Morale was as critical as walls, and engineering accounted for that. Engineering also structured time. Gates opened and closed on strict schedules. Supplies were counted and redistributed. Fire watches, patrols, and maintenance routines followed predictable cycles. This regularity created stability in a world where external threats were unpredictable. The castle's design supported this rhythm, providing clear lines of responsibility and visibility. Order was not imposed only by authority. It was built into the environment. What emerges from this system is a fortress that functions as an ecosystem. Wood, stone, and strategy are inseparable from the lives lived within them. Military engineering shaped how people slept, worked, and moved, while daily routines sustained the fortress's defensive capacity. The castle was not merely a structure to be defended. It was a living machine maintained by human habit as much as by architectural intelligence. Japanese castles were built with an unspoken acceptance of instability. Earthquakes were not rare disasters but expected conditions, and architecture responded accordingly. Timber frames allowed controlled movement, joints absorbed shock, and layered roofs distributed weight in ways that reduced catastrophic failure. Stone bases anchored structures without locking them into brittle rigidity. Survival was engineered not through resistance alone, but through flexibility disciplined by experience. Seismic endurance was not accidental luck repeated over centuries. Builders refined proportions, spacing, and materials to manage stress. When the ground moved, the castle moved with it, swaying, settling, then returning to balance. Damage could occur, but collapse was rare. This capacity for survival reinforced the authority of those who ruled from within. A castle that remained standing after an earthquake projected the image of a political order that could endure natural chaos. The 20th century posed a different threat. Aerial warfare introduced destruction from above rather than assault at the gate. During the Second World War, many Japanese cities burned, their wooden neighborhoods consumed by firebombing. Himeji Castle stood within this inferno and survived. Bombs fell nearby. One even landed on the castle grounds without detonating. Its survival was not only structural fortune but historical irony. A fortress designed for feudal war outlasting industrial conflict. This survival transformed perception. What had once been a military stronghold became a witness. The castle's intact form contrasted sharply with the devastation around it, turning endurance into meaning. Its continued presence suggested continuity in a moment defined by rupture. Architecture became memory, and survival itself became a narrative of resilience that extended beyond feudal origins into modern identity. Long before earthquakes and bombers tested it, the castle already functioned as a symbol of order. Feudal Japan was built on discipline, hierarchy, and clearly defined roles, and the castle embodied that system in space. Gates controlled access, courtyards organized movement, and elevation signaled authority. Every approach reinforced obedience before words or weapons were needed. Power was spatially experienced, not merely declared. Authority within the castle was visible and constant. The daimyo's residence occupied the most protected and elevated position, surrounded by layers of controlled access. Samurai presence was regulated through rank, proximity, and duty. Even daily routines, patrols, ceremonies, maintenance reinforced discipline. The castle did not rely on fear alone, it normalized order through repetition and structure. People learned their place by moving through it. Discipline extended beyond the military. Administrative control, tax storage, and record keeping were integrated into the fortress. Governance and defense were inseparable. A well-ordered castle signaled a well-ordered domain. Subjects did not need to see the daimyo constantly to feel his authority. The castle made it permanent. Stone, wood, and protocol worked together to sustain legitimacy. The endurance of such castles across natural disasters and modern war amplified their symbolic power. They came to represent not just feudal control, but cultural continuity. Surviving earthquakes demonstrated harmony with nature. Surviving bombings suggested historical depth beyond any single era. What began as an instrument of authority evolved into a marker of identity, standing for discipline refined into tradition, rather than enforced through violence alone. Himeji Castle is not preserved in the sense of being frozen. It is managed like a living organism, opened, monitored, repaired, cleaned, and continually interpreted for new audiences. What visitors see today, those bright white walls, layered roofs, and the keep rising above the city, exists because modern Japan treats the site as both a national landmark and a working conservation project, with rules, budgets, specialists, and constant decisions about what can be touched and what must remain untouched. UNESCO status sharpened that sense of responsibility. Himeji-jo was inscribed on the World Heritage List in 1993, recognized as an exceptional surviving example of early 17th century Japanese castle architecture, with a large ensemble of structures and a highly developed defensive system. The label matters because it changes the castle's job. The site is expected to demonstrate authenticity, integrity, and long-term protection, meaning every repair must protect not only the image, but the historical substance, wood, plaster, joinery, and the logic of the layout. That living history is easiest to understand when you look at maintenance as performance. White plaster is beautiful, but it's also a protective skin, and it must be renewed carefully to remain both historically faithful and physically effective. Roof tiles must be checked, replaced, and aligned. Timber elements, as so central to Japanese castle engineering, have to be watched for moisture, insects, stress, and subtle movement. The castle's elegance is not a static gift from the past, it is the product of ongoing labour that keeps early modern craftsmanship legible in the present. The Heisei era restoration made that reality impossible to ignore. A major multi-year conservation effort began in 2009 and culminated with the keep returning to its striking whiteness by 2015, a scale of work that involved extensive wall and roof treatment and a workforce of skilled craftspeople. Restoration here isn't renovation in the modern interior design sense. It's a controlled intervention aimed at prolonging the life of traditional materials while preserving the historical appearance that gives the castle its identity. Modern visitor experience is also engineered. Today, the castle is one of the most visited historic sites in Japan, which creates a contradiction the site managers must constantly solve. The world comes to see original wood and narrow passages, but the very act of mass visiting can accelerate wear. Foot traffic has to be guided. Certain routes become one-way. Access changes by season or conservation need. The result is that tourism becomes another layer of the castle's defensive intelligence, movement controlled not to stop an enemy, but to protect the building from love. Inside, the castle still teaches feudal order through space. The steep staircases, shifting light, tight turns and layered thresholds aren't museum theatrics. They are the real geometry of a fortress built to manage bodies and information. Even when people enter with cameras instead of spears, they feel the same spatial discipline. You slow down, you watch your footing, you realise you're being guided. That is living history in the most direct sense. Architecture shaping behaviour across centuries without needing a single reenactor. Outside the keep, the castle's role expands into civic identity. It anchors the modern city skyline while quietly contradicting it. glass and traffic below, white plaster and tile above. Himeji's castle, parklands and viewing angles turned the fortress into a shared stage for daily life. School trips, seasonal festivals, casual walks, so the monument stops being distant and becomes familiar. UNESCO heritage in practice means the castle belongs to the world, but it also belongs to locals in the ordinary rhythms of the year. What makes Himeji feel alive is that it carries multiple timelines at once. The fortress still reads as a masterpiece of wooden construction and defensive design, but it also bears the marks of modern stewardship, measured restoration cycles, documented conservation choices, and the constant negotiation between access and protection. UNESCO status does not turn the castle into a relic. It turns it into a responsibility, one that keeps the white heron standing, not as a memory sealed behind glass, but as an active, maintained presence.